Great. Well, Gray, perhaps you can kick off. Tell us, what is it that inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, thanks so much for that. I think a few factors. One is when we consider people using the term Neo-Calvinism out there, just in the theological literature and even in the non-theological literature, there's a lot of confusion about it. It's associated with transformationalism, postmillennialism, triumphalism, a kind of maybe naive understanding of human transformation of society, especially Christian transformation of society. And recognizing that when we're reading these caricatures, reading these critiques of Neo-Calvinism, descriptions of Neo-Calvinism, that it really doesn't line up with the primary source material, not even with regards to Abraham Kuyper, and especially not with Herman Bavinck. So even during seminary at Westminster, I would hear critiques of Neo-Calvinism, but then people would say, well, I like Bavinck, but I don't like Neo-Calvinism, allowing, therefore, Neo-Calvinism to be defined beforehand, rather than recognizing that Bavinck is a progenitor of Neo-Calvinism, right? So I think what happened is that there are receptions of Neo-Calvinism, especially in the Anglophone world, and maybe even in the Dutch world as well, that has been the marker of Neo-Calvinism for North American, some Asian, and also Dutch minds, rather than actually the primary sources. So the downstream receptions have come to define what the movement is, rather than the original primary sources. And so that's one reason. And secondly, I think there's ironically not much dogmatic literature on Neo-Calvinism. So when we take a look at the literatures by Neo-Calvinists themselves, especially in the more recent decades, you see treatises on philosophy. You think about, for instance, Alvin Plantinga or Nicholas Wolterstorff in that regard. You see treatises even on missions, like Michael Goheen's work. You see treatises on public theology, but not, again, so much on systematic theology and the dogmatic literature. And I think that's a misstep. Perhaps it's because Bavinck had just recently translated. Not much of Kuyper was translated until very recently. So we wanted to fill in that gap and show them that actually, first and foremost, it was very much a theological movement. It was a confessional movement. It was rooted in the Catholicity of Christianity. And it's not meant to be a thin cultural engagement without that dogmatic mooring. And we wanted to show that from the primary sources. And that's why we wrote this book.
Mm-hmm. Do you think then that some of the criticism of Neo-Calvinism comes from the intuition that it leads to a sort of doctrinal downgrade?
That's
somebody
right.
would say to me, Neo-Calvinism in North America, I think of certain colleges that have been very identified with it, that have drifted in some ways very far from not only theological but also ultimately Christian moral principles as well. So you think it's the popular image of Neo-Calvinism that has really subverted its image as a theological good, if I could put it that way.
I think so, yes.
And that all that we have talked about so far, the political dimensions, the political theology, if you will, is not really what we're up to in the book very much. What we're up to is bringing out the dogmatic distinctives, and the dogmatic distinctives of this movement. One of those, as it pertains to the church, would be an emphasis on an ecclesiology in relationship to the kingdom of God. So ecclesiology in relationship to eschatology, that gives rise to a theological ethics that is really centered on reflection and it's the implications of the fact of the kingdom of God to come. So one of the mistakes that Neo-Calvinists of later generations have made at times is to speak in ways like building the kingdom. Kuyper and Bavinck have no time for that type of language, and instead they want to talk about the organic church, the church that's commissioned and sent, the essential church, Christians in relation to Christ, union with Christ, that the fact that they're sent into the world to witness to the kingdom of God in every sphere of life. So one of the big implications, I think, of the Neo-Calvinist theology is the movement and push of the organic church to be witnessing to God as salt and light in all the spheres of life, never building the kingdom, but projecting the kingdom in the current order, showing forth the kingdom, if you will. So that would be one that comes to mind.
Yeah, and so this idea, though, right, this witnessing to the kingdom of God, this idea of Christian witness in the organic church being scattered and sent, it's not meant to showcase, I think, like, oh, when we're doing Christians, the typical objection is, well, does this mean that there's a Christian view of math or plumbing or whatever else, right? But the emphasis here is that everything natural, everything creational is good, and Christian existence is natural existence, right? So in that way, therefore, this is the motif of grace restoring nature. Christians are called to be truly human in that sense, right? Because grace restores nature. And then the second emphasis as well we want to bring out is that Neo-Calvinism provides an impetus for engagement with culture that doesn't just affirm culture, right? Because when we take a look at, for instance, Boving's Catholicity of the Christianity and the Church and his essay on common grace, he argued again there that oftentimes you go into two false binaries. Either you divorce yourself from the world, thinking that you're pure. That's the Donatist move. That's a mistake because you're not thankful for the way in which God is sovereign, even today, as he was sovereign in the past. People are still made in the image of God. You're called to engage the world. But the second false step would be that the other side of it would be just to conform to the world, as if Christianity doesn't witness to the created order. So therefore Christianity in that sense challenges the misdirections of culture because they are actually misconstruing nature, misconstruing creation. So in that sense too, the Christianity has and the Neo-Calvinism has a very creation affirming, nature affirming kind of theology. It's not just about us against the world, but actually it's creation affirming because grace restores nature.